Hello, everyone. I am Reverend Kevin Small, Senior Pastor here at Hope United Methodist Church, and I welcome you. Thank you for checking us out. We here at Hope live by the mission where we want to invite people to experience a community inspired by Jesus' love. So we welcome you in that way. Here we also share in 6 core values. These values are important to us as we carry out our mission as disciples of Jesus Christ. We want to enjoy fellowship, engage our youth, encourage service, encompass love. We want to live into enlightening evangelism and empowering social justice. This is who we are. This is who we're called to be. And there is room for you. Thank you. And come on in and make yourself at home.
Our research initiative is not just another church program, but a movement, a spiritual movement in this church. The participation numbers are proof that the members have stepped up to understand what research can do, not only for our membership, but our community at large. On a personal note, my family has been truly remarkably blessed during this research season. So I encourage you and let you know that you can tell your neighbors and tell your people that sit in the pew and anyone who comes within your reach that research can be joined at any time. Just because you haven't done it now doesn't mean you can't do it later. We'll welcome all participants and welcome all that consider research a viable program in this church. And always remember that Hope Church is a house of prayer every day. Amen.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for coming and joining us tonight. I'm so glad to see all of you here. I am checking you out in Facebook Live, and I'm trying to find you in YouTube Live as well. I have you here. There you go. Want to just say greetings again to all of you. I am glad to have Dr. Robert Simpson in the house, as well as Dr. Vance Ross. These are two colleagues that mean so much to me. Dr. Ross also traveled along with us to Ghana, and he was a part of that experience, and he may have to bail me out as we have some conversation on some of these things tonight. Just a reminder before we get started that this week I'm asking you all, if you can, to make sure that you are going to see American Fiction so that we can unpack that this coming Monday. We got a lot of work to do the next few weeks. I'm also going to ask if you can to get Origin in as well. I'm a little worried that will not be around in the theaters too long. It's only showing in one theater. That's the Riviera in Farmington. So feel free to check that out. We're good? Yep, feel free to check that out if you can. And of course, we're even going to look at Bob Marley, One Love, and we'll be unpacking that. But this Monday coming, we'll be unpacking American Fiction. Okay, so if you can, definitely check that out. Let us pause and ask God's blessings now. Lord, for this day, for this night, for this evening, for these that have gathered, we give you thanks. We thank you for our sojourn. We thank you one for another. We thank you for who you are. We thank you for an opportunity to come and gather and to study and reflect. Speak to us, catch us by surprise in ways that we just didn't see it coming. Give us a fresh revelation, a fresh anointing, new possibilities. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Friends, I want to again thank you, those of you who joined us yesterday. We kind of preached. We had a sermonic conversation on Straight Out of Africa. Today I get to go in a little deep, and even preparing for this experience, it was overwhelming because it's really hard to pack or unpack 8 whole days and make it into an hour presentation. So bear with me. I am wearing tonight, actually, a garment that I got from from Africa, Ghana, West Africa. And it's called the smock. And believe it or not, it's quite warm. I have these amazing pockets right here, plenty of pockets, and plenty of room with this, right? So I am sporting this. I'm loving it. When I saw it, I had to have it. I didn't care what size it was. It was the only one they had. And what I honestly liked about it was one of the garments that was on display for Ghana's first prime minister and first president after independence, 1957, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. All right? We're going to talk about him momentarily. But yeah, here we go, straight out of Africa. As I mentioned yesterday, going to Africa was like going to myself. I'm not sure whether I would have had that same experience in other parts of Africa, but I certainly had it in Ghana, West Africa. When we got off the plane, we immediately started our journey. Now, let me tell you that this journey was what we call a cultural immersion, which means we were to get deep in the culture, as deep as we could. Of course, there are many aspects of Ghanaian culture, as there are in most cultures. So we didn't get to every cultural dynamic, but we were probably able to see some of the things the average tourist didn't see. We were probably able to see some of the things, feel some of the things, taste some of the things, smell some of the things, touch some of the things perhaps your average tourist was not able to do. So our first stop, when we got off the plane, we started rolling. And the first thing we noticed was the traffic in Ghana is extremely fast-paced. They don't play over there. So you got to be rolling, no fooling around. One of the things we learned about Ghana, and you can go to the first slide here, was one of its proudest events was that of their independence from colonialism, their independence from British rule. And as we talked about yesterday, this independence is often marked with celebration, is often marked with drumming and dancing and singing. In 1957, it was a huge event. The African diaspora was very proud. The Ghanaians were very proud. All of Africa was very proud, because if Ghana could get independence from colonialism, then perhaps so could the other countries. So Ghana, the first to do so, was a shining light to all of the continent, but not just to the continent. It was a shining light, actually, to those in the United States. As we mentioned yesterday, Martin Luther King, he came to this celebration. Adam Clayton Powell came. A. Philip Randolph came. Ralph Bunche came. This is 1957, and they were electrified by what they saw, and that was some of the impetus and the power and the energy that enabled them to return to the States and continue to launch in a deeper way the modern civil rights movement, MCRM. So this gentleman here, third slide here, is actually was the president who came to study at Lincoln University, and he studied politics, he studied government. He was phenomenal. He was a writer. He wrote many, many books. He was inspired by the academic process. And yesterday we celebrated Greek Sunday. He was a member of Phi Beta Sigma, so he came and immersed himself in the American educational experience, and he learned much, read much, studied much at an HBCU, and took that back and applied that to his further study and his further degrees that he would secure. He was a brilliant man, but because of a coup and because of conspiracy, he was driven out of the presidency and became very ill while in exile and passed away. He was the only son of his mother, so she was extraordinarily devastated. And at the right time, some years later, they were able to bring his remains back to his beloved Ghana. we were able to go to this museum and we were able to see this. This is what you're looking at on slide 4. This is an entire monument, if you will, museum, that's dedicated to him. Here are his remains, and it is a beautiful place. It is reverent, it is quiet, it is peaceful. And inside, we weren't able to take pictures inside, but many, many informational pieces, his books, his speeches, some of the clothes he wore, the piano he played, the table he sat at, the chairs he sat in were all on display in this museum. It was outstanding. Our tour guide was phenomenal in conveying the story of President Nkrumah. His wife was also, her remains were also brought back, and they are able to lie and stay together in this way. There are many art images of Dr. Nkrumah, and I was able to capture just one, but there are many statues and things of that nature dedicated to him. And because I'm a car fanatic, I could not get a picture of his car. This is an early 60s model Cadillac Fleetwood, right? And that was a presidential car, and had an American car, and it was a sign of great success. As we traveled throughout the area, the city, we saw very diverse kinds of scenes. But for those of you who want to know, there are American products, restaurants, there are one or two, and KFC was one of them. And this was a cultural immersion experience. So we're very familiar with KFC. We weren't coming there to study or to find our cultural influence. We were going there to find and study theirs. On our way to the university, I took pictures of some of the sites while riding on the van. You can see some of the roads are very dusty. And the next one will show a similar sighting. And where we were heading to on this particular day, we were going to Ashesi University. Asheshi, Ashesi University. And it is an amazing, amazing school. One of the gentlemen who gave us the tour of the school, who's also on the staff of the university and a graduate of the university, his name is Ebenezer. And I was just blown away with meeting an Ebenezer, because that is the name of my home church. And he was the first to use the language that I was able to hear in terms of referencing us as the diaspora. We are the African diaspora. And he talked about when the diaspora returns and what a joy it is when the diaspora returns and how we're welcomed when we return. But he also made sure that we knew that when we returned, we weren't supposed to assume that we knew everything about Africa. And we were not supposed to expose or project, rather, our own American ideas or Western ideas and influence. There is much for us to learn, just as there are things that they can learn as well. So this is a co-learning experience. We didn't go there to teach them, to tell them anything. We actually came with empty buckets to go back full, and that's exactly what we did. Here are some pictures of the university. Let me tell you, this is a marvelously beautiful university. There are many of our campuses in the United States that come nowhere near living up to this particular campus. Absolutely gorgeous. The students were young, energetic. The faculty is bright. We were able to hear a couple of lectures, conversations as they opened their Center of Pop Culture. So this is an institution that weighs heavily in math, sciences, architecture, computer engineering, things of that nature. There were students out there studying. I looked over the shoulder of one. They had an algebraic or some kind of math expression that was this long. I said, good grief. I got a headache looking at that. But they were working things out. And we all learned so much just by being with those students, listening to the faculty, listening to the lecturer that day. It was absolutely outstanding. For me personally, it solidified my deep love for academia. And whenever I'm in an academic setting, it's something about it that I just come to life. And it's something about the quest for truth, the search for truth. It's something about the exploration of ideas. And academia is one place where I can bring my whole self, no matter how wacky or crazy or difficult the idea is. I can bring that in the context of those who are considering ideas, concepts, theories, possibilities, avenues, revelation, enlightenment, reflection, depth, meaning. All of that just opened my senses so much, and I was so glad that this kind of was the beginning of the journey, and it was just an amazing experience. Now I'm going to stop for a moment because I want to make sure that if you have any, yes, the language, let me check the questions. The language is English. Ghana is an English-speaking country. While there are various languages, Twi and a few others, most of the people in Ghana speak English. And I'll talk a little bit about that. That's a good question, Susan. Thank you. Wow. Wow, David, you actually got to meet Dr. Nkrumah. That's incredible. That's incredible. And I'm going to go over here to YouTube. I just want to make sure we're in good standing here with each other. All right, so it looks like we're good to go, so I'll continue. I'll continue the journey. Thank you all. So here's a couple of more sites here. And you can see here a student studying, one walking on the campus. Yes, that's the student who was looking at that extremely long mathematical equation and working it out. Let's see, we have this slide here, if we can go to the next one, is I just stopped for a moment and looked. This is a spot where they gather to eat on campus, and I just looked over the landscape and it was breathtaking. So this was a very hazy season in Ghana because the winds are bringing in some of the debris from the Sahara, and it makes the sky kind of hazy for several weeks. So we didn't get to see a lot of sunshine. And when we saw sunshine, it was as though you're looking at the moon at night. The sun's rays didn't make its way through all that haze. But it was warm and it was hot, that's for sure. So, and humid. Oh my gosh, very humid. So this was a section here of gatherings, social events. They're also thinking about using this space for theatrical experiences. There's a grassy area right there, and we were looking from a balcony down. So that's kind of what that concept is. Now, if we can stay here for a moment, you see how powerfully beautiful and amazing this school is. It was very hard to keep up with taking pictures of everything, but everything was absolutely second to none. The office space, the lecture halls, the campus, the grass was manicured to perfection, the greenery, the sights, the housing. It was absolutely breathtaking. So you can imagine the juxtaposition that many of us felt when we went to another school in Mangpong. And that happened to be a Methodist school, and let's see if we can pull that up. So this was the John Vosburgh Memorial Methodist Vocational Center. Now, interestingly, friends, there are not United Methodist, there's not a United Methodist presence in Ghana, but there is a strong British Methodist presence in Ghana. And there are 26 dioceses, we would call them conferences, but they utilize an Anglican form of government, and they suggest the term diocese, and there are 26 throughout the country of Ghana. And this is one of the schools that is not as physically prepared and equipped as Ashesi University was. Let's look at the next clip. We met students who were there Saturday. They were learning how to sew. They were young girls, younger ages, well-behaved children. In these lower grades, all the children wear the same hairstyles. They are not really allowed to let their hair grow out. They all have the same hairstyles and basically wear the same uniforms when it comes to school. You can see also the next one where they are standing and greeting us, and they were singing, and they sounded beautiful and amazing. Of course, we drank plenty of bottled water just to protect our systems from going haywire, but that was always made available to us and usually needed because of the heat. But these were beautiful young ladies who were already learning the art of sewing and making things by way of arts and crafts. And one of the pieces I'm wearing on my wrist was made by this school, so I'm very proud of them. Now, the next picture is actually a picture of the library, and it is in significant need of repair. This school is in relationship with Emory Fellowship United Methodist Church in Washington, D.C., where Dr. Joe Daniels serves, and they are in some ways supporting the efforts so that this school can get back up to a decent physical capacity. The next slide is also the classroom slide. This is where their classes are held. And I went up close just to take a picture of that blackboard out there. And it says Methodist, that of course stands for junior high school. Now, some of you asked me about English. Now, let me show you a sign in the classroom. Speak English always. And this, of course, is to make sure that they're living into English-speaking endeavors, which the country requires. And by the way, most of them speak very fluently English. Here's just some sites that pictures that I took while walking out there. This next one was amazing to me because that is actually an anthill. I have never seen an anthill that that tall, that large. That anthill was actually amazing. Now I'm going to stop because it looks like we have a couple of questions. Center for African Pop Culture was inaugurated. Can you speak about polyrhythms? So yes, Dr. Francois was the professor of music at this school. And even though they don't have a degree program in music and they don't have a degree program in English Lit or some of the other liberal arts, they are available as core classes, and you must take them for graduation. So he was explaining, and he's an accomplished pianist, but he's a PhD in music, and he was explaining to his class, who thought that they might be getting a free, easy grade, because how hard can music be? But one of the things they were exploring was what made African music African. And some of the students were parroting and suggesting various theories. Most of them he rejected. And he talked about how some of their theories would possibly work, but they also work in the Western world. And in some cases, they're from the Western world, especially when it comes to technology and using synthesizers and robotic type of music elements. So that is not necessarily considered to be African music. What was the element of African music was how you can have 5 drums or 10 drums or 15 drums that come together, and each of them are playing a distinctive beat. Not all the beats are the same. Each of them have a distinctive beat. They have many meters or polymeters, and you can get confused as to where the actual beat is, as to where the actual rhythm mechanism is. And the students were pushing him. So you're trying to say that's not African? He said, yes, it is, but you have to tell me why you think it is African. So when you hear all of these African drums and they seem to be playing various and different things at the same time, and you actually get confused and lost and not able to determine what the beat is, that is when you're experiencing a polymetrical dynamic of musical expression, and that is African. He broke that down. Thank you, Dr. Ross, for that question. I love it. I love it. The healthcare system, so I don't really know much about, of course, there are hospitals and medical centers. What I don't know is what the insurance arrangement is, whether it's healthcare for all. We actually didn't discuss that. And Dr. Ross, if you remember something about that, if you can put that in the chat, that'd be helpful. But I'm not remembering too much about the healthcare system in that way. Oh, I misread it, David. Thank you about your Aunt Kerr. I see what you're saying. She introduced you to who he was. Very good. Also, let me just check my YouTube. That was Facebook Live, my YouTube friends. Do they have lessons in any of the indigenous languages? I didn't detect, at least at the school in Pampong and Mapong, that they had lessons in the indigenous languages. They spoke them, needless to say. So before too long, everybody's bilingual. But I'm not sure if they have those kinds of lessons, especially in a school, this particular school, where you're not even allowed to speak Twi or some of the other native languages they're in. All right, so let's get back. So friends, you can see the juxtaposition here. I don't have a picture of the cafeteria where there's a big hole in the ceiling. And the children have to, gather there and imagine in rain season what a mess that can be. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in some of the communities outside of Accra or some of the rural settings where there just isn't enough resources, or there just aren't resources allocated to the educational development process. I do want to say that we were able to, in speaking about aesthetics, we were able to get to a retreat center. And I just looked out my window and I saw one of the most just beautiful scenes out there. And there's nothing significant about this. It was beautiful. And this was one of the moments that hit me that I am actually in Africa. I am here in the motherland. This is the next picture of a different angle from my room, and it's absolutely beautiful. All right, and then there's another picture I was able to capture just of the landscape, the greenery, So one of the big things in Mampong is that of cocoa tree farming, all right? And I want to introduce you to a pioneer in the cocoa industry. This may not be that visible to you, so I will read it. Tete Kwarshi, pioneer of cocoa industry in Ghana, born at Christiansborg in the early 1850s. He brought cocoa to Ghana from Fernandopo in 1879. He planted the first cocoa at Mampong Aquapim in the eastern region of Ghana. He died in the year 1897. And that tree, my friends, is still there. It is still there. That tree that he planted is still there. And you can see this with this gentleman who really basically gave us a crash course on how to make chocolate, how to make cocoa. He was an agriculturalist by far. He was not formally trained by way of degrees and education in a formal scenario. We actually tried to get him to consider it. But when you hear of schools that have in their name agricultural and mechanical or agricultural and technology, because when these schools were developed, especially in the United States, agriculture was a major industry. And you got to learn that school built its name on those titles, agriculture and mechanical, or agricultural and technology. And technology wasn't, as you know, wasn't necessarily computers, but it was often how to use machinery to impact even greater things when it came to growing vegetation and farming, right? So we don't see much of that today in the U.S. in industrialized areas, but this gentleman right here broke it down. He explained the ins and outs. He talked about how you grow mango trees and other trees so that the cocoa trees could have the shelter from the mango trees from too much sun and too much precipitation, and the cocoa grows in greater numbers and even in size. So this was the table he worked on. And from this table, he showed us how to do it. All right? So this is what the cocoa looks like when you cut open those elements there. Here we go. So you can actually eat those. And we tasted those. And that is where all chocolate begins. Powerful, deep. But what happens is it goes through a fermenting process. Cloves, thank you, Dr. Ross, cloves. It goes through a fermenting process, and it becomes this. And that is what becomes your chocolate bar. Okay? And we tasted it. He let us eat it. Very thick, intense chocolate taste without the milk, without sugar, without any additives. You can't get in. Chocolate is an intense thing, let me tell you something. And that's exactly what he showed us in this regard. All right, and here's the tree. Here's the inside after it's been scooped out. Here are the beans. Fascinating. It's a real science to this, and he has mastered it. To be honest with you, I will never forget the genius of this young man. And I will always think about the many, many educated young brothers and sisters out here that are never given the opportunity to take it to an academic realm to even further their profound knowledge. So I will keep him in my thoughts and in my prayers because he knows what he's doing. There was one night, friends, that we were actually stopped by the police. And I just want to kind of talk to you a little bit about that. A lot of the police officers ride on motorcycles, and we'll keep this up here for a second. And the bus driver, and your driver is somebody you kind of rely on and you build a relationship with. He drove us the entire time. He was very quiet in demeanor, very humble, very gracious, very kind, like most of the people we met, to be honest with you. And the night we were stopped, we were already exhausted and fatigued from the day. And it wasn't just the travel, it's the heat that also adds to a sense of fatigue. And something happened that he got pulled over, and we were all getting anxious because here is a black man being pulled over in Africa. And what it was, he didn't see a police officer's hand signal, so he kept going, and the police officer made him turn around and go back to the spot. And to get back to that spot, we had to sit in a whole lot of traffic. In Accra, there's a lot of traffic often there. And while he pulled us over, he was driving and a police officer was riding along next to him, and they were debating and having a conversation, and the conversation kept going, and we were getting a little anxious because we know what this is like. But the thing is, we didn't know what this is like. This driver didn't have the justice issues that we have here in the States when it comes to being pulled over by the police from time to time. We were learning our first lesson in cultural immersion, which is to be careful about projecting your own cultural dynamic, your own cultural influence, your own cultural view onto a scenario in another setting. It looked like one thing, but it was not. Nobody was yelling and screaming at each other. Nobody was threatening to pull him off the bus and throw him in jail. He didn't get a ticket. The bus wasn't impounded. It wasn't a bad experience at all. At most, it was inconvenient. And the driver seemed to understand that context. The police officers talked to him like a human being, not like somebody who was a possible problem or somebody who might have been a criminal. It was a very level, eye-to-eye conversation, and they were both equally talking to each other. I don't sense that they were angry at each other, and Dr. Ross can comment on that, but I just sense that, it was a peaceful police experience, and we all had to learn what that's like. We all had to learn what that's like. So, we had to, this is what we mean when we say cultural immersion. Let me pull over and ask. Let's see if we're doing good. Any more questions? Oh, the tuition. I am not sure what the tuition was to Ashesi University. We did ask about that, and they did give that answer, and I'm not remembering what it was. But I'm thinking it's around 12 or 13,000 American dollars, if I'm not mistaken. It's nowhere near as expensive as education is here in the States. However, it could very well be expensive to them. And here again, when we talk about cultural immersion, their definition of expensive and mine may not be the same definition whatsoever. So I really don't even have a place to say it's not that expensive. But compared to American educational costs, where some institutions are in the 50 to 60 to 70 to 80,000 range and 100,000 range a year, this one, comparatively speaking, was a bit more affordable. All right. Thank y'all for hanging in here with me. Let me tell you, the next place we went to was the spice market. Dr. Ross mentions there was a peaceful experience of a man correcting a man, then allowing him to leave. I think that's exactly what we saw. Exactly what we saw. All right? And that was for the benefit of our YouTube audience. This girl, and we're going to leave her up for a minute, because this little girl, couldn't be any more than 10 years old. Maybe, and I'm pushing it, maybe 12. But what you don't see is on her head is this huge pot. And she's literally, so first of all, the women walk with these pots on their head or baskets on their head to perfection. Africans use their whole body in their life. They don't often wear shoes or they wear sandals. I mentioned that they have strong feet because some of them easily will walk barefoot. We saw a couple of guys working on a roof, repairing the roof with no shoes on. All right, no shoes on. They use their whole bodies in their daily life. To walk straight like that without any leaning and twisting is some serious ability and serious physical strength. And this girl is well on her way. She's holding it, but she just walked up to us and stood there. Now, I had no idea what she was doing, and I didn't say anything to her. I just, watched her. And you can see all of the spices and rices. This spice market is a cook's dream, okay? And because I'm not necessarily a cook, I wasn't the most entertained. But for those who are in the kitchen all the time, they would love all of this. And some of us, try to bag up as much stuff to bring back. By the way, you cannot bring cocoa back. Like the ones we saw on the cocoa farm, you cannot bring that back to the States. You cannot hide that in your bag. They have dogs to sniff that kind of thing. That stays in the country. You cannot export that, all right? But anyway, here she is walking around with us, and I'm like, what is happening here? And I'm starting to feel a little uncomfortable. But what it is she makes her money. She makes exactly, Lori, because they had some for you, let me tell you. But she makes her money by the things you buy, you put it in that pot. And she walks around with you carrying all of those items on her head. So that's what she was there for. It took me, it was not until the end of this experience that I learned that. And I'll be honest with you, this trip was a lot. These who sell, they're very aggressive, and they want you to buy, And we were told to don't feel sad or feel some kind of way if we didn't buy them, because they didn't. That's just what they do. Come, you want to try this? You want to try this? This looks, or you want to put this looks good on you. You can do this. You can have this. This is exceptional. When are you coming back? Why don't you do it? Are you a person of your word? Don't leave me out here hanging out. So they had a system down pat. We went through a meat market that I struggled. I'm so glad we didn't walk down that path deeper, because here's all of this fish and all of this meat just out in the sweltering sun and the heat and flies. And I just stepped in and looked in, and he said, "Which one do you want? What do you want?" And I'm like, just looking. So my Americanization, if you will, kind of showed up, because I'm kind of used to an FDA world, right? And so having all of this meat and fish out there without refrigeration or sitting on ice or covered or something was extremely eye-opening to me. But that's what they do, and people go there and they buy it and move on. It's an amazing thing. So that was the spice market that day. Very active. They sell, it's almost like your convenience little shops, and the people selling them live there. Behind these spices are little compartments where people live. So it's a real community of those who sell things. So there you go. After this, we went to the home of our tour guide through the spice market. And friends, this is the living room and the dining room and whatever room you want to make it. There was a curtain there, and I'm not exactly sure what was behind the curtain. I didn't ask because this was a personal home. They made food for us. They were spring rolls, I think they were, Dr. Ross, and let me tell you something, they were delicious, all right? And I have found whenever I travel internationally, the food in the homes are typically on a whole other level than in some of the commercial establishments. But this was a soda called Malt, and it had a taste, I can't remember what it tastes like, but it was a very interesting taste to it. And it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad at all. I drank a lot of soda, way more than I drink here in the States. But it wasn't bad. We were sitting here listening one to another. This is where, and I mentioned this in a sermon, this is where the host washed our hands. And it was in a little neighborhood that didn't have a lot of sanitation out there. There was couple of little tiny markets, a little barbershop, and we walked through it, and the children were just playing and having a ball. A lot of goats are there. As we would see dogs in the community, they have goats out there in the same way. So it was a powerful experience to be in that home. There were two young boys in that home. One felt that he wanted to be a pastor, and one of our pastors on a trip really made good contact with him, and we all gave him, some of us gave him our number so that he could keep in touch. So this was the first home that we were able to be in. And we were very humbled with how humbled they were with us being there. So a beautiful, beautiful experience. I put here one of my favorite beverages that I ran into contact over there. It's called Alvaro. This is a peach flavor. Let me tell you, this thing was good. It almost tasted like ginger ale. It had a similar kind of thing, but it was good. And I thank God whenever I could get a hold of some Alvaro. So I'm going to stop here, friends, and switch gears just a little bit. And And we're going to go over just a tad bit longer than usual because this part is the most intense part, and we're going to talk about the slave experience from the river and the castle, and then we'll be done. So, we journeyed to what is known as the Ancestral River. And you can see the paintings here. This river was where the slaves were, this river was where those that were captured and enslaved were taken to the castle. Now keep in mind, these enslaved persons, kings and queens of their villages, school teachers, if you will, educators, mothers of babies, traveled by foot 400 miles and then some. Some of them walked as far as 400 miles away from other countries to get to Ghana, to be housed in a slave castle where they would be auctioned off, sold, and sent. So I tried to do a close-up for you. This scene is here where they were punishment huts. So there would be some who fought back. And they were punished, men and women, and thrown into these type of compartments where many of them would eventually get sick and pass away. Right here, you see a picture of the branding of those that were captured. That was their identifying mark. And you also see what you notice is called the last bath here. So once they crossed this river, it's referenced as the last bath, they were on their way to the slave castle. And this next picture is a slave owner who is actually showing off his property to either be sold or traded. Now let me pause here and just say a word about what we learned in terms of how this happened. Our tour guide suggested and shared with us that Africa is a very disciplined country, very disciplined, very strict. So committing adultery, for example, would land you in prison. Stealing something that belonged to somebody else would land you in prison. It would make you a prisoner of sorts, that you would be confined to the system of correction. Because of the people's deep unity, however, in order for slavery to work, the colonizers had to instill distrust within the African people, something they had not known before. Before the colonizers came, the African people were unified and they were a one people. Now, that didn't mean that they didn't have tribal conflicts and they didn't war or have conflicts with other villages, because they often did. The way the colonizer manipulated that was to introduce weapons. And what the villagers would do is to give them, in exchange, prisoners of their own. those who were considered prisoners of war, or those who were fighting other villages. And at this point, now you have a fragmented Africa. It's very reminiscent of a couple that met at a tree. They were told not to go near and told not to eat the fruit from. But once they ate the fruit, one of the key successes of the demonic presence there was Adam and Eve no longer trusted each other. So much so that they hid from each other. And that's what their answer was to God. We were naked and ashamed, so we hid from each other. All right? Similar concept, don't you think? Lack of trust was one of the key ingredients introduced to the African people to provide an overwhelmingly successful transatlantic slave trade. And that process was walking through extraordinary heat for 400 miles to this river. And it was at this river where they were often separated. Some people weren't strong enough to go the journey. And so you had the strong and you had those who were weak. Those who were weak were often killed or just died or left to die. Our tour guide in the next slide shows us and informs us about the experience called grounding. There at this river you see the ancestral graveyard, and there behind us are pictures of many who were advocates for the cause of freedom of black people. Martin Luther King's picture was up there, Malcolm X's picture was up there, some of our American civil rights leaders as well as African civil rights leaders. There was no division of these people in African eyes. They were all fighting the same battle, and that is the liberation and freedom of Africans and those in the diaspora. This gentleman introduced us the concept of grounding, and this is when you take your shoes and you stand barefoot on the ground. And there has been recent talk about the benefits of doing this. And he made note, he said recently the medical community has come up with how this actually works, but we've been knowing this for hundreds of years, and we've been doing it for hundreds of years. So we participated in the naming ceremony, and we were giving leaves to kind of wear as necklaces, if you will. Of course, I was representing Hope heavily there, but this is part of my naming. And this, my friends, reminded me of how ritualistic the African community is. It also reminded me of my own ordination when the stole was placed over my shoulders. And here, this African brother is placing this particular vegetation over us. I'm not remembering what this is, but it had a very familiar smell because I had this in my backyard growing up as well. And here's a wider look. I'm not mean looking on purpose in this shot, but it was hot and I was frowning from the sun and all of that. But you can see how we wore these around our necks. All right? Then we begin this walk. Welcome to the ancestral river park, this very same river that the enslaved crossed to get to the castles. Now let me say we had to walk this route without any shoes or socks. We were as barefoot as you can get. And here is I took pictures of the ground. I took pictures of the ground so you could see what we were walking on. Now, the tour guide had no problems walking on this terrain. He was moving like he was walking on plush carpet. But some of us were struggling to make it through this path without any shoes, walking on rocks and pebbles and sharp leaves and dirt. It was an experience. And here's a wider look of the walk and the path we walked. But I was then convicted because just as I was willing to complain, I'm only walking a couple of football fields, but imagine those walking 400 plus miles. Imagine those walking 50 miles, 25 miles. And then we get to the place of the last bath. Because this will be the last time the enslaved will be in water on African soil before they're placed on ships to leave the land they call home. Here's a wider view of that. So they walked through that, went through the water, and made their way. And you can see all kinds of things on the ground here. And again, we have no shoes on. So this is also a very humbling experience, very humbling experience. This sign here explains the concept of the last bath. You can see that they are in the water with chains so that there will be no attempts of escape. There were always attempts to escape, by the way. Now we're going to hold this picture here, and let me just say to you that these were our ancestors who were being forced out of their native land, and the concept was they would never come back. They would never come back. And sure enough, many of them never made it back home. Never. The only ones who did were their descendants, like we. And we went to that river through this sign. The next one. They went through the bath of no return. We go through the bath of return. When we walk down those steps, here's a wider angle of it. When we walked down those steps, we were headed to the same river that our folks walked through to get to their captivity. But we come back to stand in the same river. I'm almost getting emotional thinking about it. As freed and liberated people. Here are pictures of the river. It's not very deep. The next picture. And the next. Here I'm standing. And the tour guide invites us to talk to the ancestors' spirits and souls that were still at this river. And I shared with them the names of my children, the names of theirs. And I asked them to watch over my children and my grandson. And I told them there was still work to do, but we're all right. We're all right. Whew. You will never step foot. You can go to the next one. I can assure you, friends, you will never step foot in these waters and be the same. It was a form of baptism for me. It was a form of renewal for me. I don't know if you can see it, but in this shot of water that I took, right in the center, it looks like the reflection of a woman holding a child. Holding a child. I'm not sure if you can see that image. Dr. Ross prayed for us in that river. We sang songs in that river. We thank God in that river. And slowly, one by one, we came out of the river. And I will never see the world the same. I couldn't have planned on that. I couldn't have expected that. I didn't envision that. Here are some of the trees. Some of them are bamboo trees that are shadowing over the river. Here are more pictures. The first auction, the first branding. So many of the enslaved were branded, and we'll hold this here. Many of the slaves were branded, and some of them did not survive the branding. The branding killed some of them. There were infections, and some of them were too weak to undergo that. It was a horrible, horrific experience. And those who were sickened by this or died were just simply discarded. And on our way, walking back, still with no shoes, we run into this sign as we exit. The tour guide made it clear that there is still slavery, friends. And the work that is ours is to constantly emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. Part of the naming process, I meant to have this picture up further, part of the naming process was to have our arms marked. And you see that. Now, as you can see, that was extraordinary, and I'll pause. Number one, we're almost done. Thank you for hanging in here with me. I'll pause, number one, and just check for questions. Suffered was an understatement, Sister Helen. You're absolutely right. Did they have any dungeons where slaves may have been kept? Yes, they did. And that's what we are referencing when we say the slave castles, and we're about to go there now. And that will conclude our time. Here is the castle we visited. And we'll keep this up. This is called Cape Coast. And in here are dungeons, but now it's a marketplace where you could buy goods, and the colonizers lived on these premises. Colonizers lived on these premises. All right. Here's another angle of it. Now you will see the cannons out here. That's because there was always threat from other countries. Keep in mind, there were, Spain, the French, Portugal, America, UK, they all had interest in this property known as slavery at some point or another. So to protect the slaves, they made sure that they were able to use warfare and instruments of warfare. Now this pathway going down into that tunnel is on your way to what is known as the door of no return. And once you walk through this door, that was it. You're not coming back. Here are pictures of hallways. This also is out on the Atlantic Ocean as well. And I stood in the Atlantic Ocean because when I first got there, I had resentment toward that ocean. It was the waters that took these mothers and fathers and children away from their native land. And to be honest with you, I had to become one with the water. And I did. Yes, Germans too, Bishop Deese, absolutely. A lot of colonization going on there. Here's a picture of, are you saying I have a question, Mark? Oh, okay. Here's a picture of the ships. They're typically out there fishing, and of course, it's reminiscing of the stories of Jesus calling the disciples from the shore, or he taught from the shore. This is what that looked like. There was also a place on the side of the road where they actually made these boats by hand. I'm not sure if I have one of the pictures in here, but they did that with their bare hands. Now, this next picture is the picture of the Methodist Church next to the slave castle. It is called Wesley Methodist Church. It is the second largest Methodist church in Ghana. It is a British Methodist church. It was founded by the colonizers. And I took a picture of this church because of where it was originally founded. And it was founded in a room above the slave castle. So they're in there worshiping, they're singing, they're having communion, they're preaching, while underneath of them are people who are jam-packed in a room with no lighting, no plumbing, no water, except whatever rain might escape through the window. So when you hear of a resentment toward Christianity as a white person's or a white man's religion, Some of that comes from this type of experience and rhetoric. And we know that this was not Christ-like. But it wasn't just the Methodist church, it was also the Anglican church. It was a spot for churches to gather on top of slaves jammed in their dungeons. So they had to hear them, they had to smell them, they had to be eerily aware that underneath them were people who were captured and dying and getting very little to eat and very little to drink. As we entered the slave castle, there was a plaque by President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, who found out that much of her ancestry is Ghana. So in 2009, they traveled there as a result to visit that Cape Coast castle. Here's another angle of it. I stood upstairs in the castle, and I just was fascinated how circulating this castle is the church. Churches. And way up top of that hill is another fort. So there were guns and cannons there ready for battle. But in the middle is a church. I just found that fascinating. How the church could be around so much evil and be complicit with it. Here again is the sign of door of no return. I think I found a better angle. That's what that sign is. Now let's go inside. This was the room that held the women. The tour guide showed us that image on the wall, which is a pregnant woman. And the theory is she leaned on the wall so much because that window is the only place they get sun, the only place they get any air. These are women who were jam-packed in here, nowhere to relieve themselves. Some of them are menstruating, some of them are with children. And some of them would be in there for a year until they were sold and placed on a ship. Here's a closer angle. This is almost like a watermark of this woman here. And you see the sign, the next one that says female slave dungeon. This next one is one of the cells where people were placed into like jail. So for folks who fought back, they went in there, and guess how long they stayed in there? They stayed in there until they just eventually died. So you could be placed in there, and you would be placed in there with dead bodies or people on their way to death, and there is not an ounce of light. You can go to the next one. There's in the next one. I was fascinated by how thick this door was. And the next one. So we are probably witnessing and possibly witnessing one of the first acts of what we call mass incarceration. This next one is actually the men's dungeon. And this is the only light that they had. And my camera didn't pick up pictures of the wall or anything, just that light. And that's what they had, being in that space for a year. Again, with no plumbing, no toiletry, no water. There's the next place. What I find interesting, and I want to point out to you, is the floor. This is concrete floor, but it's covered with something. Can you imagine what it's covered with? They took an analysis, a scientific analysis. This floor, over the years, has built up a surface of blood, sweat, tears, and waste. And to walk through that dungeon is to stand on those elements. Here are more pictures of the dungeon. Here's another look at the floor itself. It's concrete, but you can't see the concrete. That 400 years ago, that is the results of tears, blood, sweat, and waste. Other pictures here. Now this scene, friends, the next one, is a scene that we had when we left the female dungeon. We had to find our own places to collect ourselves. We stood in a circle, and the tour guide asked us to place our hands on the wall while we held the candle. And we had to talk to our mothers, our grandmothers, our great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmothers, our possible ancestors. And we had to talk to them again. And I don't mind telling you that I said to them, we made it back here. We've made it back here. Don't you worry. We've made it back. I'm so sorry that this was your experience. But because of your fortitude and your strength, we will be all right. There's still work we have to do. And that was the nature of my conversation. And I, with the rest, were overwhelmed with emotion as I had to be the one, or as I closed this out in prayer. And I believe my closing line of that prayer was, shadowed beneath thy hand may we forever stand, true to our God and true to our native land. So, I'm going to stop here because I think this is just a good place to stop. We went to the home of W.B. Du Bois, and if I can go to 98, if you can go to 98, Marcus, I don't know yours is numbered. Yeah. That was our group. We were at what I fell in love with called the Lemon Lounge. The Lemon Lounge. And we all had the sense that Africa, we didn't want to go to Africa. Africa wanted us to come to it. We were called back there. There's a quote from Dr. Nkrumah that says, and I shared it yesterday as well, I am not African because I was born in Africa. I am African because Africa was born in me. If you can go to number 107. In closing, this is the imagery I choose to remember. These are the sons and daughters of those who remained. And they will grow up and tell the story to our sons and daughters in the diaspora. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land. Friends, I thank y'all so much for joining me tonight. May God bless us in our pursuit of liberty and justice. And I will take one more look just to make sure I'm not forgetting anybody. Yes, Bishop Deese, Hope Church is already talking about a trip over there already. What kind of human being could do something like brand another human being? It made me sick to my stomach to even look at this after all this time. How could you as a human being actually do this to another human being? Exactly. Very unthinkable. All right, my friends. Thank you. May the Lord bless you and keep you. And we'll see you next Monday. Good night, everybody. Thank you.